Theory. Theory is everywhere. Theory of business, theory of evolution, theory of relativity, theory of gravity, theory of everything. It's everywhere without you even being necessarily aware to it or realizing it. Same as practice. You practice in a musical instrument, practice a sport. Maybe you have a hobby, practice piano. Practice is also in a lot of aspects of life. Practice can exist by itself, same as theory can exist by itself, or they can actually coexist. Let's maybe look into what the definition of theory actually is. Oxford defines theory as a supposition, or a supposition essentially means a certain uncertain belief, or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. Essentially, a theory is something that seems like it makes sense. There is some basis, and you can hypothesize that it works, but it's still a belief. It's an uncertain belief. And then maybe let's jump over to see how Oxford Dictionary actually defines practice. Practice is the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method as opposed to theories relating to it. So practice is what it sounds like. Practicing. It's application. That's what it is. And, one thing to really consider here is you kind of have a split between what theory is and what practice is. If you're stuck in a theory, you become stuck in a dream or a nightmare because you're constantly thinking and, not really getting past the application piece of it. You're not getting to that piece. In your head, you can be amazing. You can do anything in theory, but without application, you don't know. I like to think of theory of more of a mind game almost and practice as actually doing something. For example, when we maybe look at the applications in science, there are definitely a lot of studies that lend themselves to this space. And one that I like to look to is a study that shows participants, a group of participants that was a control, a group of participants that mentally practiced, and a group of participants that physically practiced. And specifically what we're looking at here is they practiced a 5-finger sequence on a piano. Right, so you had 3 groups. So one group essentially mentally practiced it. The other group physically practiced it. And a third group was just the control, just standard practicing. So what is the point here? The point is that the group that did the 5-finger sequence on an imaginary piano for 2 hours a day had the same neurological changes and reduction in mistakes as the participants who physically practiced the same passage on the piano. And, I think this is really interesting here because the study actually found, too, that potentially mental practice and physical practice may lead to the same changes in neural structure and synaptic connectivity. In other words, in most terms that the average person can understand, as well as myself, because I definitely had to Google some of these terms, what it means is practice is good, mental practice is good also, but basically mental practice and physical practice is good, so double good. One other study I actually found, which was really, really cool and interesting, is a study done by Abdi et al. And it's a study that considered 40 participants aged 18 to 25, and they were split into 5 groups, so 4 experimental groups and 1 control group. So the control essentially, were not being tested on. They were really the basis for the study. And then they measured the control's results against all the 4 experimental groups. Now, in these 4 experimental groups, they were as follows. There was a physical group, a mental group, a group that did physical then mental, and then the group that did mental then physical. So before we jump in and really try to understand here what's going on, and I am not familiar with this topic subject at all, but it's badminton. And the groups that we're talking about, physical, mental, and whatsoever, the physical portion is the group that actually practiced badminton, but they're specifically looking at something called the short serve. I'm going to show you an image here, and I honestly had to spend about half an hour to an hour just trying to understand what badminton is and how it works. It's not something I'm super familiar with. All I know is they have something called a cock or shuttlecock, which I guess flies through the air, and you try to get it on the other. It's like tennis in the air, basically. I've seen it, know a little bit about it, but never actually done it, and learning about this for the first time. But basically, what the short serve, what they were measuring is accuracy, speed, and so on. And what they were looking at again is these 4 groups and 1 control group. Do you want to guess which group actually came out on top? It was the mental plus physical group. Now, what the mental and the physical group did was for the first week when they did the study, they actually just thought about doing it. They watched these athletic videos on short serves for a week and, just to try to get the theory of it, essentially. And then after a week, they actually did it. So then they actually did the activity. And they noticed that basically their serves were more accurate and quicker, faster, and so on. This was even... So take that really quickly to understanding. This means that they were better in the end. They had a better learning curve. They were quickly more accurate and also quicker with their serves than the physical group, essentially the group that just did physical practice. Then the mental group, obviously the mental group just stood there watching videos and thinking like, I'm going to be so amazing. And they were even better than the physical mental group, which essentially did the activity first for a week and then went mental. And I mean mental not in the slang sense of going insane, but mental of actually, doing the mental practice afterwards. So I think that's just crazy fascinating to understand. And it really ties back to theory versus practice, because practice at the end of the day is actually doing something, and theory is thinking of doing something or essentially theorizing. And really kind of leads us down this rabbit hole of, what's more important? Is theory more important? Is practice more important? And practice is doing, theory is thinking. And I actually like to refer to my personal friends. I'm going to show a photo, of when I had coffee with them, actually, back in the day. But Immanuel Kant and Leonardo da Vinci, we go way, way back. Immanuel Kant said, experience without theory is blind, but theory without experience is mere intellectual play. And he's a very, very smart man when it comes to some things. And I think it's really interesting to look at it and just try to understand that, yeah, basically, if you just practice stuff and you do things, well, you can keep doing it, but maybe there's a better way to do it. And if you take a step back sometimes and say, okay, well, maybe there's a better way to do this. Why don't I try doing it this way? It could actually, help out here. And then in the same method, if you just look at theory, all you're doing is just thinking. That's it. Just thinking. Obviously, it's very good, but if you keep thinking, there is no doing. So I think that's also very interesting to note out. And then on the other hand, you have Da Vinci. Da Vinci said, he who loves practice without theory is like the sailor who boards ship without a rudder and compass, and never ever learns where he may cast. So again, kind of looking at it, and I know the quote was a too long, didn't read kind of interpretation of it. He said something slightly different, but essentially, really what he's saying is, practice is awesome, but if you don't have theory, then how do you know where you're going to go? You sort of need a compass and a map, not to belabor the point, to really understand where you go. But I think the really one of the coolest things that comes to mind is the story of a person way back when, and his name is Dick Fosbury. Dick Fosbury actually changed the high jump forever, and the way he changed it, essentially, he modernized it to how we see it today, where they actually run at the long jump and do a backflip over it. So there are a lot of wonderful videos out there, and I'm not going to dive too much into Dick Fosbury. That's in a video of itself. But basically, he was a student, an engineering student, and applied theory of what he knew to say, okay, well, if I jump at this angle, I can actually jump higher and further. And he changed the high jump forever, and I think I might have said long jump, so apologies for that, but high jump forever, where he actually jumped over on his back, and it was the first time in the world that anybody ever saw that, and that really changed it forever. And he was not athletic by any means, in the sense of your standard athlete that's trains and trains and trains. No, there's actually a story of him where he went to the opening games, and he missed the Olympics. He missed the opening piece of the Olympics, to go drive out to the desert in Mexico somewhere. And this was when the Olympics were held in Mexico City, and just experience the sunrise. So I think it was really, really interesting to consider this. And that's what I'm trying to get at is theory is great. Practice is also great. But together, they're essentially like a handshake. In the end, everything is relevant to thought and application. And without one, you only really have half of a good view on everything. And that's not effective and not sufficient in the world we live in today. Thanks.